Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. We are here talking about serger tips and techniques, and I am going to show you 5 super handy serger tricks that you might not have been aware of. All of the clips that we're going to be playing come from our Serger and Coverstitch Basics class over at Closet Core Patterns. So if you have a new serger or you're curious about sewing with one, this is a complete class that teaches you everything you need to know about operating these machines, the serger in addition to the cover stitch. And there's also a full video sew along with an exclusive pattern, the marine top, which I happen to be wearing right now. So if you are interested in building your serging techniques, I really highly suggest enrolling in that class. And here's a little sneak peek with 5 tips that we pulled. Let's take a look. So if you have to finish a bunch of seams, one of the ways to speed your sewing up is to kind of do bulk sewing. And so one of the ways that you can speed up serging is by chaining your pieces together. So I'm just going to show you how I would do that. It's just a little technique for sewing a little bit more quickly. So if I'm at my machine, I'm just going to start this piece. And really this works for pieces where you are not worried about the threads unraveling because the end is going to get caught in a hem or in another seam. So rather than chaining off and then having a piece that I have to pull off and clip, what I can do is just get my next piece right after. And as soon as that one's done, this one starts. And as soon as that one's done, this one starts. And on and on and on. And this is a way that really speeds up your sewing because then all I need to do is come in between these pieces and trim the threads. So that's just a little trick for speeding up projects where you have a lot of pieces to finish with your serger at the same time. Another thing I want to talk to you about is dealing with thick areas and bulky areas. Particularly when you're sewing with like a really thick fabric like this. So this is a big beefy double knit. It's like almost pre-quilted. If I just went up to my machine right now, let's actually take a look and see what happens. Because it's so thick, it tends to get, like these can get jammed really easily. Like I'm almost having to feed it through because it's so freaking thick. And then because it's so thick, I'm like, maybe it's gonna end up getting jammed. I have to be really careful with this. And by the way, if you ever do get a jam, like let's say this got all looped in here or something, you don't want to force it. You want to do whatever you can to avoid forcing and pulling and putting a lot of pressure on this machine. Because again, there's a lot of action happening here. You've got needles, you've got loopers, you've got knives. So whenever possible, you want to kind of cut away anything that gets really jammed, unfasten or cut away. And then as quickly as you can, just chain off to the side. Try to get it out from under the foot and over to the left. So because this was so thick, as I approached the seam, it really got misaligned because it was trying to feed through and the top layer really got pushed to the back. So one of the secrets to dealing with thick fabrics like this, when you're, again, this presser foot is almost touching the bed of the machine. I'm coming in, I'm dropping this on top of it, and all of a sudden the presser foot's going like this. So one of the secrets is to start the cut prior to sewing. So then instead of also asking the knife to do all this work for you, you start your trim, you lift your foot, you bypass the blade altogether, and you get as close as you can to the needles. And now, as I start sewing, the knife is just going to continue the cut that I've already made, rather than having to start one at all of this bulky fabric. And this is much better. It started much closer to the end because we weren't forcing those layers out of alignment. So that's just a little trick. I use this a lot with workwear and denim because sometimes you really have a lot of seams that are all meeting at the same place and your machine is really going to get jammed, especially if you're sewing through multiple seams that have been pressed in either direction. Even if you're alternating them, pre-cutting it and trimming off the desired seam allowance so that you're kind of saving the knife from having to do that work, it can be a huge help. So we've got this neckband. I'm doing a sweatshirt fleece, so this is very, very thick fabric. And if I was to go and attach this band to the shirt at the neckline, and then serge everything together, because I've got these two seams pressed close together, not only am I now serging this and this, but then I'm approaching this seam and I'm sewing over 4 layers of fabric plus the two beneath. It just gets very thick and sergers can get jammed. And so one of the little tricks for dealing with that is just thinking about reducing bulk. So what I'm gonna do is just clip down the middle of that neckband. I'm not clipping into my needle stitches, but I just want to release the seam so that I can press one seam in one direction and one seam in the other. And now when I fold this neckband, they're butted up against each other. They're not on top of each other, they're just right next to each other. And that really helps to reduce bulk. So when I go to sew this now, I'm not going to be dealing with a big, thick area. The second thing I want to talk about is sewing in the round. If your seam allowance doesn't really need to be trimmed, like if you're doing a 3/8, and most knits, as I've said, should have a 3/8 seam allowance. If you're not doing very much trimming, sewing in the round isn't that hard. You start your seam, you go all the way around, and then you pass back over where you started your stitches, and both lines end up kind of being secured. The one underneath gets secured because you've sewn over it, and you sew a couple inches. If you wanted to, you could pass that thread train through the neckline with a darning needle like I've shown you how to do before. But generally, if I pass far enough past the original stitch line and trim it, even if it unravels a little bit, I'm not worried about it going anywhere. Like there's enough thread there holding everything in place. I'm not worried about the neckband coming undone. But sometimes maybe you're sewing a woven in the round, or maybe you're dealing with like a vintage McCall's pattern where they used to always do all the seam allowances 5/8 because they didn't assume anybody had it a serger, even though it's a knit and you know you need to trim it. So if that's the case, it can be hard sewing that because you're trimming a 1/4 inch off as you start, but then you come back around and it's hard to kind of meet back up perfectly where you were. So I want to show you a little technique for dealing with that. Okay, so I've got my neckband pinned in place. And if I needed to trim the seam down, I'm going to trim it before I even get to the machine. So I'm going to start my stitching here. Make sure everything's nicely aligned. Come in with my snips, and I'm going to, and this might give you a little heart palpitation, but I'm going to trim right here. And then I'm going to trim out that 1/8, that 1/4 inch that I would probably trim at the machine. So I have this little section I've already trimmed out, and I'm going to show you why this is helpful. Okay, so now that I'm at my machine, rather than starting my seam here, trimming a 1/4 inch off, and then passing back around and not having a hard time figuring out where to start and stop, since I've already removed the amount I need to trim, it becomes really simple. So what I'm going to do is start my seam here, get as close as I can to the needle, and I don't want this pin here, I'll tell you that much. Start serging. And now, because I started the trim, the knife is just going to continue the trim I already created. And because my seam allowances here are in alternating directions, I'm not going to be dealing with a big level change. Oh, so see what happened here? This got pulled. I wasn't pulling these out of the way, and it got pulled and stuck here. So what I'm going to do is put my foot up, see if I can get out of this jam without having to pull everything. Okay, so I caught it early enough that I'm just putting, I caught it, I'm pulling it back under the knife again, putting my foot back down. And now I'm just gonna be a little bit mindful of catching that with my stitching. Make sure all my layers are still aligned. There we go. And one thing I want to point out is because most t-shirt bands are cut shorter than the neckline they're going into, and we do that so they're not sticking straight up, they need to be cut a little bit smaller so they lay close to the body. The t-shirt band is shorter, there's less length in the garment below. So what I'm doing as I'm sewing is I'm just stretching the fabric out so they both are the same length. Like if I just let them feed through the machine right now without doing that, I might end up getting ripples, or I might end up having almost gathering because this layer is so much longer. So I'm just stretching out the fabric a little bit. I'm not stretching it beyond the length of the band, but I'm just stretching it so that they're even with each other and I'm not seeing any ridges, or I'm not seeing any, like the fabric is all laying flat. Okay, so here I'm coming back to the front. Now, if I hadn't cut out this little section here, I would have this big wide area and I'd have to get from here to here. But because I've already pre-trimmed this area, all I need to do is let the machine trim up to here and then keep sewing, and I'll meet right back where I started and everything will be level with each other. Okay, so here's our band. And as you can see from the back, everything is nice and even here. My stitch has been, I could probably trim this off a little bit, but I've overlapped my stitches, so I'm not super worried right now about these unraveling. And the next step, of course, would be to press everything flat and then top stitch this in place. But just a little tip for sewing in the round, especially when you need to trim your seams. So we've talked quite a bit about different serging sewing techniques, and now I want to kind of get into some specialty conditions. And those conditions would be an inside corner like this, an outside corner like this, inner curves, and outer curves. And none of this is particularly hard, but I just want to show you some of the ways that I use the serger so I can get nice, even, consistent stitching, and also making sure that we're being aware of those thread tails. So with the inner corner, the key to doing this all in one pass is that you want to basically try to flatten out this line so that you're stitching in one pass. And the way that you do that is by clipping. So in this sample, we just clipped right into the corner before we sewed, and then that allowed us to open up the seam. And then when you're passing through the machine, you just pass through the entire line. Now, what I would recommend doing, and why I drew this little red line, is that I would suggest if you're gonna do this with a serger, even if it's a knit, that you just go with your regular sewing machine and just go and reinforce this corner with some short, straight stitches at your seam allowance, just to reinforce it. And then you can clip right to the inside of that stitch. Now just imagine that little pen is the reinforced stitching. So now I'm gonna go to my machine and I can treat this entire thing like one line. So I'm at my machine. I'm not trimming anything right now for the sake of this demonstration. And then as I approach this area that I've clipped, I'm just rotating this corner out so that it's in line with this. And I'm serging right over. So here we are. I have this all stitched open. Now, what ended up happening is I clipped right to this corner, but I didn't actually serge quite that far. So you just want to make sure that you're actually serging right over the area that you clipped, because there is a little bit of peek through here. But that's why it's always nice to reinforce the area with a little bit of stitching. But really the point of this is less to get like a perfectly sewn corner. The perfectly sewn corner really does happen at your sewing machine. It's more, how do I sew an inside corner like this with serging so that I don't need to chain off, thread this through, chain off, thread this through. It's just a way to finish that seam all in one pass. I wouldn't recommend necessarily like using this stitch as the anchoring stitch. You really want to go to your sewing machine and really solidify that corner. But let's go take a look at how to sew an outside corner all in one pass. So I'm just going to sew like usual. And then similar to how I finished the chaining off by rotating the piece, I'm going to do something really similar. I'm going to maybe even use my hand wheel here again, because I have a little bit more control. So I'm going to just stitch a few stitches off, raise my needles. I'm going to put my presser foot up. I'm just going to kind of liberate this from the stitch finger. I'm going to put my needle down again. And now I'm going to keep sewing. And then I am able to finish this entire edge in one pass of stitching. I don't need to thread anything in. I know that this isn't going anywhere. Okay, what if you make a mistake? What if you make a little boo-boo and you're like, ruh-roh, this is a little bit more work to unravel than a regular seam. So to somewhat quickly unpick your threads, what you want to do is just every couple of stitches, get in here with your seam ripper, and you're going to be unpicking or ripping the 2 needle threads. So that's the 2 parallel rows of stitching. And in some cases, depending on how, these are a little too tightly woven, but depending on how long your stitch length is, you might even just be able to pull those threads out. And I do find for some reason, the right needle thread is a little bit easier to pull out in one go, but I'm just going to unpick for now. Let's see if I can pull this out yet. Yeah, almost. Let me liberate it from the end here. So that one's out. And let's see if I can get this yellow one out without too much trouble. The benefit of doing this is that if you can get those threads out, the short needle threads, the rest kind of unravels all in one pass. So once you've got those needle threads removed, these unravel really easily and they come out more or less all in one go. And that comes unraveled pretty quickly. But as you could see, I spent quite a bit of time unpicking all those little stitches. You can also open up your seam. And just like you would use a regular seam pick ripper, which is just putting the ball side down, you can then go and remove those stitches like this. So if you had a 4 thread, you're going to have to do this 2 times, right? We're doing this for the first pass, that left needle, and then we're going to come through, do it for the right. It starts to unravel this way. But what you can also do, and for me, this feels way more satisfying, is just come through with your unpicker and unpick the entire seam. Now what this does is create a bunch of short threads. So there's more threads you need to unravel. But depending on the fabric you're using and your needle type, your stitch type, One of these methods might be easier than the other. So then I just come through and I'll remove all of the lower looper thread. I come through and then I actually find this easier. You can see how fast that went. So the first method, you can kind of take your time and you pick out all of the needle threads and then the looper threads come off in one big pass. This way is faster, but you have more little baby threads to deal with.